Hi there. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for 2026 SMB Cybersecurity Report, Why Businesses Are Still Exposed. I'm Kim Quinn with SensCy, and I'll be the first from SensCy to welcome you today. And thank you for spending part of your afternoon with us. So, a couple quick housekeeping notes before we get started. So, first, today's session is being recorded and we will make that recording available to you most likely tomorrow. And then second, the chat feature is open, as is the Q&A. So if you have questions or thoughts throughout today's session, you're welcome to send them in. But we will be reserving those until the end of the session, at which time we'll go ahead and tackle those. So to kind of kick us off, I'll say hello again. As I mentioned, I'm Kim with SensCy, and I'd like to introduce you all to Dave Kelly, SensCy's co-founder and chief technology officer. So prior to SensCy's following, Dave was captain of the Michigan State Police, or captain with, excuse me, the Michigan State Police, and there he also led the Michigan Cyber Command Center. Dave is a nationally recognized cybersecurity leader. He has deep expertise in incident response and threat intelligence. But perhaps more importantly for today, Dave is intimately familiar with the data that makes up our 2026 SMB Cybersecurity Statistics and Benchmark Report. Forgive me, I know that's a mouthful. We had reasons for it. So I'll go ahead and welcome Dave and pass it over to you to get started.
All right, thanks, Kim. I greatly appreciate it, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Really hopeful you learned some helpful information here that makes your organizations safer. So, I think the first thing to talk about is the key theme that really comes out of this report that we're talking about today is that what we found is organizations that adopt a cybersecurity culture are much more protected and recover much quicker from incidents than organizations who look at this as an IT problem and just keep buying additional tools without addressing the culture within the organization. And we'll get into what does that mean as we walk through this. This report is really divided into three sections. So people, processes, and technology. And we'll talk about the people portion of it pretty extensively because that's what really starts having the proper cybersecurity culture in place within the organization, where the organization starts to view cybersecurity as a business risk, just like they view any other business risk, as opposed to an IT problem that might be able to be solved by buying additional tools. So, what data are we going to be talking about today? So we have done over 500, I think at the time this report was written, it was about 556 cybersecurity assessments conducted on small and medium-sized organizations across the United States. And we define SMB as 1,000 or fewer employees. This report covers 39 industries. So those 600 scores go across 39 industries, so a wide breadth of information. Secondarily, we've also conducted external vulnerability scans on hundreds of these organizations, right? So we'll be able to talk about what are we seeing from the inside out from the cybersecurity health assessment, and then what are we seeing from the outside in from the vulnerability scanning perspective. And just so you know how the assessments were conducted, these aren't surveys or questionnaires. We're actually getting on a meeting like this or in person with a representative from the organization and a cybersecurity professional from SensCy and walking through the assessment. So let's talk a little bit about the assessment so you understand what it is. The assessment generates something that we call the SensCy score. And that's generated from 39 questions that are collecting 106 data points and they're all based on the National Institute of Standards and Technology framework, so NIST. Some of you on the call may be familiar with NIST. It's sort of the gold standard from which a lot of policy, cybersecurity policy frameworks are based. Um, you should think of the score like a credit score. We designed it that way so that it's easy for folks who are in IT who are responsible potentially for cybersecurity to explain to people maybe higher up in the organization that aren't as technical how we're doing from a cybersecurity perspective. And why that's easy for them to understand is at least here in the US, everybody knows if your credit score is 800 or higher, that's a great credit score. If it's 7 to 99, it's good. There's still some work to be done. But once it falls below that 700 and it's in the 600 range, the bank is viewing you as a risk, and therefore we're viewing you as a risk from a cybersecurity perspective. So this helps leadership to understand, hey, where are we at? And gives them a foundational thing to work from, whether or not they understand the technical details of cybersecurity. Okay. And then secondarily, I've mentioned this a little bit earlier, we're also going to talk about our external vulnerability scanning results. We've done hundreds of those. What are those? So what those are looking at is examining your digital footprint from the outside in. So every company is online now. They're on the internet. They have publicly available assets. So we're examining those publicly viewable assets using some scanning tools where we're looking for security weaknesses that the same way that the threat actor would look for them and attempt to penetrate into your organization from the public side. So the SensCy score assessment looks at you from the inside out, like what kind of controls do you have in place, what things are you doing inside your organization, and then the vulnerability scanning looks at you from the outside in, the way a threat actor who didn't know anything about your company would just be openly searching for open ports and ways in which to get inside your organization. Okay, so just some national statistics, like why are we doing this at all? This is what the national statistics show. In the small and medium-sized space, less than 20% of those companies have dedicated cybersecurity resources. And 40% of them, 47% of them have no cybersecurity budget. So it's either sort of rolled into IT or thought of like IT. And it's really important if you take one thing away from this today is IT and cybersecurity are really two different fields. There are overlaps between them for sure. There are things that you should be doing in IT that have security ramifications to them. But then there are other things that are very specialized to cybersecurity that aren't a part of IT. And then I think more importantly, the national data shows that 54% of organizations, 1,000 or fewer, think they're too small for a cyber attack. Yet we're seeing 43% of cyber attacks targeted directly at them. So there's probably a mismatch in understanding. I think out there today, a lot of times we think, well, these threat actors are targeting Fortune 500 companies or the government. But the reality is those organizations have really tightened up their cybersecurity. They've hired teams, they've bought all kinds of tools, they've changed their culture. They're becoming more difficult to break into. So these threat actors are moving down to folks who haven't started doing that yet. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the SensCy score and the distribution of the scores. So this is all across the entire 500 plus assessments that we've done. And remember to think about this information as you would a credit score. And you can see the very first time that we've encountered an organization and done the assessment, this is what the scores look like. So you can see that 800 plus where we really want everyone to be, only 7% have scored that high. When we first encounter them, only 11% are in what we would consider the improving range of 7 to 799. And then you can see the majority of the folks that we encounter are below that 699 level, right? So there's still lots of concern in this small and mid-sized space. And you can see the average score there at the top. It lists out the average score across the whole data set is only 504. So if you imagine your credit score at a 504, there's definitely work for us to do to improve. And we're going to get into kind of what that work is and where you might examine your own organization for improvement. This is breaking the data down by sectors. You can see the best sector we've encountered is banking, insurance, and finance. In the small and medium-sized space, that average score is still a 589. So obviously lots of room for improvement there. We want to see all of our clients at least at an 800 or, really try to get them over time to that 1,000 mark. Because if you're at that 800, 900, 1,000 mark, you're much less likely to encounter a successful cyber incident and much more likely to recover quickly should something happen because you have things set up properly and in place and have built that response-oriented culture. So should something happen, you're not down for multiple days. And then if you look across the board, it just kind of goes down. And interestingly, the smaller healthcare companies are the worst, which is also concerning for all of us. All right, so I mentioned this at the beginning. A strong cybersecurity culture and strategy really requires three things, right? We should be focused on people, processes, and technology. So now we're going to kind of cover what does that look like through the eyes of the assessment and the SensCy score that we described earlier. So first thing I want to talk about is leadership needs to be engaged. This is a business risk. Cybersecurity is a business risk. It's no longer just an IT problem. We've seen the average time that companies are down, for example, if they don't have a cybersecurity incident response plan that they've tested is 21 days. So imagine if your organization's down for 21 days, that has a huge business impact, right? It has a business impact on your revenue, on your client retention, on your brand reputation. So executive briefings, having leadership involved in executive briefings on a regular cadence where we talk about where are we at, what are we doing in cybersecurity, what data puts us most at risk, right? What are we doing to protect that? And talking to them in more business terms is something that is really important. And as you can see here, only 28% of organizations on the small and medium sized space are actually doing it. So starts at the top and then works its way through the organization, right? So written cybersecurity policies. We have HR policies, probably a lot of them. Why do we have human resources policies? Because it protects the organization, right? It protects the organization and it protects the employees, right? We need to be doing the same thing in cybersecurity. We need to have policies built that we are following, that our employees are following, and that help us to protect the organization. And as you can see here, only 23% of the organizations of these almost 600 assessments we've taken, only 23% of those organizations say, yes, we have cybersecurity policies in place. Cybersecurity awareness training. It's probably one of the most important things we can do is to deploy a program inside the organization that the employees feel like is an employee benefit as opposed to, hey, if you don't do this training, you're going to get in trouble, right? We need to have training programs that help employees understand what they should and shouldn't be doing in the workplace, right? How do they recognize a phishing email? How do they recognize when someone's trying to socially engineer them, right? We as organizations need to make sure that our employees understand these things so they can become our first line of defense rather than our most critical vulnerability. Because right now, successful cyber attacks, 88 to 90% of them, depending on which study you look at, are caused by one of our employees making a mistake, right? So it's really important for us to put programs in place that help them understand. The other thing that it does for them, it helps them be secure in their daily lives, right? Everybody's online nowadays. Their kids are online. We have employees that are working from home. So if we position this training as an employee benefit and we teach them things that'll protect them in their personal lives, they'll translate that into work and be better employees at work and safer employees at work. But as you can see here, only 12% are doing awareness training at least every other month, and that's what we recommend, and that's what NIST recommends. Um, and the 50% of them are not doing it at all, and the vast majority are doing it annually or quarterly, which is really not enough if you think about your own learning. If you're only doing something once a year, it's not a priority for the organization. If you're only doing something quarterly, it's probably not a priority for the organization, and at least I'm not going to retain it, right? So, it's important to do these things on a regular cadence. Phishing simulations, when we are still seeing a significant majority of successful attacks caused by one of our employees being phished through email. They click on a link, they download an attachment. God forbid they provide their credentials because they think it's a legitimate website, and suddenly we have a threat actor who's into our system, or we have some malicious code running in the background in our system that we're not even aware of. So it's very important to do these phishing simulations where we control them. We send things out to the employees and we help them to recognize what does phishing look like in today's world, because these threat actors are getting better at it. They're using AI, right? So it's one thing to have a dashboard that shows, hey, here's the people who clicked on a link, and then go to them and say, hey, you got to stop clicking on links. It's a whole nother thing to have a training program that's in place that actually teaches them. So with the way our program works, if you click on a link, download an attachment, something pops up right away. It says, hey, you've been phished. Don't worry, this is training. Here are the indications of phishing in this email. So when they're in that, oh no, I made a mistake moment, that's when they're most likely to learn. And then you compound that learning with 1 month you do training, the next month you do a phishing simulation, the next month you do training, the next month you do a phishing simulation. So we're doing that kind of practice, learn, practice, learn, practice, learn all the way down the line throughout the year. But as you can see, 55% of these organizations aren't doing it at all. Um, and only a small percentage are doing it quarterly or annually. So I like the fact that the bigger number here is at least every other month, but it's still only 23%. Okay, so to summarize, really here on the people side of things, what we really want to do is we want to turn our organization, our people, into our first line of defense, right? By educating them, by making sure that leadership has prioritized cybersecurity, understands that it's a business risk, talks about it, is briefed on it, and that, leadership being engaged, just like in any other initiative that we're doing, will trickle down through the organization. And then investing in our employees by training them, doing phishing simulations, having good policies in place, and making sure everybody's aware of how they can most safely work, whether that's in the office or at home or on the road when they're traveling. So the people first approach is really critical, and should be a part of your cybersecurity strategy. Okay, now we're going to transfer to or transition to processes. So we've talked about people. We'll transition into talking about some processes that need to be in place. So the first thing I want to talk about here, as you can see on the screen, is asset inventory. So I think the best takeaway here is we can't protect it if we don't know we have it, right? So as your companies grow, we see this all the time in smaller businesses that are growing. They add new staff. Those staff need new tools, and somehow we lose track of what we have in our IT infrastructure, right? So, do we know what software accounting is using? Do we know what marketing is doing, right? Do we know what tools all of these folks have? So, it's very important to have an asset inventory in place so you know what you have, and then you can look for, are there any vulnerabilities in these things that we have, and proactively have a process with which to fix them. So as you can see here, doing a little bit better on asset inventory. 49% of the organizations of the 500 plus organizations said yes. We do have an asset inventory, but still a large percentage that was not doing it or just simply didn't know. Notification of critical security patches. This is important and it ties back into your asset inventory. So if you don't know what you have, you can't get alerts on when critical security patches come out. And one thing that's important to understand about these critical security patches, they're often called CVEs, which stands for Common Vulnerability Exposures. But by the time, if you pick a company, say Oracle, for example, if you have some Oracle software, hardware inside your organization, by the time they become aware that a threat actor has broken into their system, um, they then have to build a patch. They then have to deploy that patch, and then that has to be an alert that comes to you, right? So the time that passes uh, has allowed a lot of threat actors to already exploit that vulnerability. And most of the time, unfortunately, when we find out about a vulnerability and we have a security patch released, it's because somebody has already exploited it. So the longer you wait, the more these threat actors are looking at that and trying to exploit that vulnerability on your organization. So we got to have a good asset inventory and we got to get notified when these patches are being released. And you can see we're doing a fairly good job on notification, 61%, still a lot of room for improvement. However, when we get to installing the critical security patches, right, it's one thing to have a notification. It's a completely different thing to install them, right? And now we're getting a little bit worse on the data. So 60+% are getting notified, but only 33% are installing them within 48 hours. So it's really important if you have a critical security patch that's been released, just know that it means that threat actors are already out there exploiting it. It's only a matter of time before they get to you. So it's really important to install those as quickly as possible. And under the NIST framework, the recommendation is within 48 hours. And you can see only 33% of those folks who actually were getting alerts, or 33% of the whole population, sorry, are installing them within 48 hours. And, if you think about that 60+% that we're getting alerts, a lot of those are not installing them within 48 hours. So important to be doing that and staying on top of that process. Okay, penetration testing. We can see here only 22% of organizations are doing penetration testing. What does penetration testing do? So it's different than scanning. In scanning, we're looking at is there a possibility that there's a vulnerability either on the inside or the outside of my perimeter, my security perimeter, right? With penetration testing, we're taking it an extra step further and we're saying, okay, we're going to come into the system, we're going to look for vulnerabilities, and then we're going to attempt to exploit those vulnerabilities. And then you're going to get a report of exactly how we did that, right? So then you can close that vulnerability off and not allow a threat actor to do something like come in through your email and then once they have access to your email, move laterally through your organization into your HR systems or other data systems that you might have, right? What we want to do with a penetration test is show you where we could move from one part of your organization to another, and then show you how to what steps you can take to close that off. So in other words, if someone got into your email, we want to make sure they can't get anywhere else, right? That's what a penetration test will show you, and that's why they're important to do at least annually. Okay, dark web scanning. We can see only 18% of organizations are doing this. Um, Unfortunately, there's a lot of data out on the dark web, and what we've seen, particularly in this small and medium-sized base, and even in larger organizations, is employees have a tendency to use their work email to sign up for personal things. So you might not have a breach at your organization, but if I used my work email to sign up for my Netflix account, let's say, and Netflix had a breach, and I was using the same password on Netflix that I use in my work email, and that information sold on the dark web, now as a threat actor, I can buy that information. I can go um, and try Kelly Dave at SensCy.com, D Kelly at SensCy.com, Kelly D at SensCy.com, Dave Kelly at SensCy. Eventually I'll get in, right? There's only so many combinations for the email address that we all use every day. And if I've got that password, Now I'm inside the company network. So knowing if you have employee information available on the dark web, whether it be email addresses, credentials, sometimes it's social security numbers, other personal identifying information, and occasionally you'll see things for sale that have been exfiltrated from an organization that the organization didn't even know about. So it could be customer data, could be intellectual property. So there's lots of reasons to at least do scans of the dark web and know what's out there, and then take the necessary precautions to close those things off. Okay, incident response plan. Um, we can see only 31% answered yes. This is also a very critical thing. Um, you know, we have disaster recovery plans, um, probably a lot of us, but what's more likely to happen? A tornado or a fire at our building, or we actually have a cybersecurity incident. It's much more likely that we have a cybersecurity incident. And so we need to have a specific incident response plan that tells us step by step how to respond to this cybersecurity incident. A good plan will have questions that leadership should be asking at each stage, right? Because oftentimes leaders are not probably as familiar with technology unless they came from the IT space. So we want to make sure that leadership knows what questions to ask at each stage of the incident so that we're doing things correctly. We're doing things in the right order. We're not doing things we shouldn't be doing because all of those things can delay our recovery, right? If we don't do things in the right order, if we do things we shouldn't be doing, a recovery can go from hours to single digit days to weeks, right? So a good plan will walk you through what should be done. A good plan will also have crisis communication embedded in it, right? Because what we've seen is we have an incident and then the whole team spends a bunch of time trying to figure out what do we say to the employees? Do we have to disclose this to our customers? What do we say to our partners? That stuff should all be built in advance, signed off by your attorney, and ready to go in case there's an incident. So you can just ship it out and you can focus on recovery. So incident response plan, really important. Um, Updating it at least annually. So if I go back, we've got 31% that have one, but only 15% are updating at least annually. Things change inside organizations, as we all know. And because cybersecurity incident response plans have roles in them and people within the organization that need to fill those roles, it's critically important that we update it at least annually. If we pull it down from the shelf and we looked at it in 3 years and we have an incident, how useful is it going to be to us? So these are the processes we need to be thinking about doing. Okay, backups. So backing up data properly is probably the most critical component of recovering from a ransomware incident. So you've all heard of ransomware. I'm quite sure by now it's where the threat actors lock your computer systems down and then demand some form of money to give you the encryption key to unlock them. Um, the good news is if we have our backups set up properly, most of the time we can recover our data and stand back up without having to pay that ransom. So you can see the really good news is on the top, 85% of organizations have their backups on a separate network, in a cloud service, or offline, right? Which allows if the threat actor gets into your system and your backups are on the same network that they're into, they'll lock your backups down too. And then you won't be able to recover. So really important to make sure we're on a separate network, we're offline, or we're in a cloud service that's designed to do backups. Um, 78% of organizations are backing up their data at least daily. That's a great sign. We should be doing that. As we move to the bottom of this graph here, only 57% have encrypted backups, so that's a bit of an issue. And only 42% have successfully tested the restoration from a backup. So I think that's very important. It's one thing to have our backups set up properly, but we've never tested the recovery. We don't want to be testing the recovery for the first time when they're in the middle of an incident, right? If we're in the middle of an incident and everything's down and we're trying to bring things back up, we don't want that to be the first time we've tried to do that, right? practice, practice, practice doing that, so that if an incident happens, it's going to be like clockwork. We'll know exactly what to do. So to summarize kind of the process, you know, having accountability within the organization for these various processes, and there's others that you'll see in the report, right? So we certainly um, recommend that you download the report and read through it. I'm just covering at a high level some of the highlights from the report. But the bottom line on the process side is if we build these processes into our organization and we have accountability to make sure that we're doing them proactively, it's going to significantly reduce uh, the risk that we have of becoming a victim of a cyber incident and increase our chances of recovering faster. All right, let's transfer to technology. So we'll talk about, there's a lot of things we can talk about on the technology side. There's all kinds of tools out there, but we'll talk about a few sort of best practices. Internal vulnerability scanning is what you're seeing here. The data is not great on this. We can see only 12% are doing it at least weekly, 10% monthly, and 12% quarterly, and 53% aren't doing it. We need to be scanning our internal networks and our internal systems on a regular basis to make sure we don't have any vulnerabilities there. If we're not looking, a lot of times what we're seeing these threat actors do, if nobody's detecting them, they might sit in your system for 2 or 3 months before they do anything because they're just gathering intelligence, doing reconnaissance, seeing how you all operate, trying to pick the best time to either deploy some ransomware to take you down or just trying to figure out what kind of data you all have, right? So if we're not scanning, we can't detect those things. So internal vulnerability scanning is looking at you from the inside in. And now we're talking about external vulnerability scanning, right? So looking at you from the outside in. I think I said that the wrong way the first time. So the inside out is internal and the outside in is external. Um, so outside in is the way a threat actor who knows nothing about your company at all, but is just, for example, scanning the internet for open ports, right? And if you have an open port within your organization, somebody set up a printer, somebody set up a hotspot, they didn't set the security controls correctly, that thing's wide open. They're just looking for a way in. Once they get in, that's when they'll figure out who you are and what they might want to do. So it's important to do those continuous external vulnerability scans, particularly because we change a lot of things, right? We have a website. That website's connected to our CRM. That CRM is connected to some AI tool that helps us with, lead generation or marketing, right? Each one of those connection points that starts at that website is a potential place where a threat actor could exploit you. So doing an external vulnerability scan will map all of that out and show you if you have any vulnerabilities there. Password keepers, only 18% of organizations have them. In today's day and age where we have to have a very complex password of, a minimum of 8 characters, but better 12 to 14 characters. And we want to have a different password for every one of our systems, right? So our employees aren't reusing passwords. To my other example, if they have a complex password, but they're reusing it everywhere and something gets breached, then that password is effectively a vulnerability, right? So we should invest in password keepers for our employees so they don't have to remember all of this stuff. These password keepers will generate the password, generate a new unique password for each of the systems that they're using, and it will remember it for them, right? It takes that human element out of it. So if I change it, I'm not just changing it by one digit because that's what most people do. It completely takes that away. And also, one benefit to it is if you have multi-factor authentication, which we haven't talked about yet, turned on, and you deploy a password keeper to your employees, you don't have to change your passwords at a regular cadence. You don't have to force people to change passwords, right? Um, NIST has looked at this and said, hey, if we've got MFA deployed and we're providing a password keeper, people can keep the same password. We don't have to keep forcing them to change it. So it creates a little bit of an efficiency for you too in your organization. VPN, if we're traveling, if we're working from home, we should be using a virtual private network. So what a virtual private network does is it basically encrypts the data traffic from the device that I'm using to the work area that I'm logging into, right? So if I'm logging into a server or I'm logging into my email, whatever I'm doing, it encrypts that traffic in a secured tunnel, right? So somebody can't penetrate that and look at that information as it goes back and forth on the open internet. Where this really comes into play is when you have folks that are traveling, if they're using public Wi-Fi, if they're at a hotel, those types of things can be insecure and or they open the opportunity for, particularly like at the airport, there's been lots of cases where I bring what's called a pineapple device to the airport. It creates a Wi-Fi that everyone can see. I name it Detroit Metro Airport Wi-Fi. And now everybody's coming to my Wi-Fi and I'm seeing all the traffic that's going through there. If somebody's on a VPN, it's encrypted. I can't see it. That's one a reason. Another reason is if someone's working from home, it's a best practice to also sort of segregate that information as it goes across their home network. Okay, endpoint protection platform. So what is an endpoint? It is any laptop, tablet, smartphone. All of those things are endpoints. So if we have a device and we're using that device to connect into the network, that device needs to have protections on it. And an endpoint protection platform will provide those protections to those individual devices. It's different than antivirus. We should have antivirus and an endpoint protection platform because an endpoint protection platform will do things like automatically run updates, right? So if your Google Chrome needs to be updated, if your whatever you're logging into, if your Zoom needs to be updated, if your Microsoft tools need to be updated, those endpoint protection platforms know that and will push those updates directly to your machine and make sure those things are updated. And they will also, if your employees go somewhere and unfortunately hit something that's malicious, it'll either block it, quarantine it, or let somebody review if it should be released, right? So it's like a robust version of antivirus that's doing just a lot more in the background to protect your organization. You might have also heard of things like endpoint detection and response. Um, those things are similar. They just have a few more features and functions. But if you're a smaller organization, an endpoint protection platform is sufficient. As you grow, you might want to invest in endpoint detection and response, which is really protecting the endpoints, but also has a response component included into it that does some more advanced quarantining and notifications and things like that. All right, two-factor authentication. So there's three components of two-factor. Um, Probably there's two of them here that are really, really important. Number one is, do we have it on our email? Most attacks are coming through email, so it's super important that we have 2FA enabled on email, whether they're accessing it at work or accessing it on their personal device, whatever, 2FA needs to be enabled. The second most important one is privileged users, right? If you have users that are admins, right, and have the keys to the kingdom inside your systems, they have admin rights. They definitely need to be using two-factor authentication. And then lastly, just enterprise-wide. I got two-factor deployed on everything. So you can see we're 60% of the way home on email, 66 on privileged users, and about halfway home on just deploying it across our whole organization. So tools, you know, tools are really important, but what we see oftentimes is we buy a lot of tools, but we haven't put our cybersecurity strategy in place. And so the tools aren't really supporting the organization the way they should. We first need to have a cybersecurity strategy. We need to make sure that we have trained employees. We need to make sure we have leadership bought in. We need to be having regular touch points. And then we need to determine from there what tools can we put in place that can help support our strategy. What we see oftentimes is people buy a lot of tools with no strategy. A lot of them are overlapping. Sometimes they're hard to use, right? People don't know how to configure them. They configure them improperly. So first build a strategy, focus on the people, and then see what tools you need to support. All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit here just on a time check. Now I'm getting into sort of the external scanning. So what are we seeing from an external scanning perspective? And there's a lot of data on this slide, but I'm just going to boil it down to 78% of the time when we run a scan for the first time on a client, we see some sort of email misconfiguration, email security misconfiguration. And this is why we see so many companies falling victim to a business email compromise, wiring money to places they shouldn't have wired it, to threat actors actually, um, you know, becoming the victims of spoofing campaigns, where threat actors are able to pose as the company's CEO or the company's, director of IT and look just like them from an email perspective. Um, all of those things are able to be done because of email security misconfigurations. Domain security issues, slightly different. Um, this allows a threat actor to redirect website traffic or intercept that traffic. So if this isn't set up properly, someone could go to your website, a threat actor could create a cloned website. They wouldn't even know they're not on the right website, and then they can do all kinds of malicious things from that website. Or they can intercept the traffic that's on your website. So if you're communicating through your website to your CRM, right, there's probably a lot of client data, customer data, things like that, that you'd want to make sure you protect. And 77% of the time, we're seeing some misconfiguration there the first time we run a scan. Website security issues, there's lots of different ones. We see a lot of them on the various brands of websites, from WordPress to GoDaddy, whatever your website's built on. There's just a lot of plugins when the website's first built. And as we build the website, we don't think that, hey, we need to update these plugins, right? But a good process will be updating those plugins and making sure all those things that we're using on the website are secure. Encryption issues, a little less than half, still not great. Um, but we are seeing, expired certificates or no certificates at all. And what this allows threat actors to do is really just intercept. If someone logs into your website and uses a password, they can just literally intercept the login credentials, the email address, and the password. If our certificates aren't up to date, we don't have encryption. Credit card numbers, if people put credit card numbers into your website to order something, same deal. So really important to have those certificates updated. So to summarize on the external vulnerability scanning side, there's a lot of information on the slide, but I'll just say it's important to do it regularly. Our websites are usually always growing. We're always trying new things, right, to drive sales, and a lot of times it's tied in some way to our public footprint, right? Like we want to publicly be known. We're doing a public webinar right now, right? Are we doing these things in a secure way? And external vulnerability scanning can help determine that we are and make sure we are into the future. All right, lastly, we'll talk about insurance. 62% of organizations have cybersecurity insurance. Um, Insurance is not cybersecurity, but it does help you in the event that you have an incident, right? These incidents can be very costly, so it is very important to have the insurance. But one thing to remember, um, you know, insurance is not going to protect you from brand issues. It's not going to protect you from client loss, your clients churning, your reputation, your revenue in the future, right? Those are the things we should be thinking about from a business perspective. What it will help us with is the cost of recovery. That's what it'll help us with. And then one thing I always want to tell people, you can see here, if I go back, 62% have insurance. Only 32% said, yes, I have ransomware insurance, and 36% didn't know. So it's just important to check your policy. Not all cybersecurity insurance is the same. So look at your policy. If you see words like extortion, that's what an insurance policy will call ransomware. They'll call it extortion. If you have that in there, then you should look at what number is associated to that extortion. So am I protected for 1 million, 2 million? If you don't see those words, you probably don't have ransomware insurance. Okay, so we talked about a lot of, dire things. Let's talk about what we're optimistic about. Here's what small and medium-sized organizations are doing really well. 83% of them are using the principle of least privilege, which means, hey, I only need to give my employees access to the things they need to do their job. 85% of them are limiting administrative rights to only those whose job it is to update technology, which is great. 83% pre-install at least antivirus. 74% have taken the proper steps to secure their Wi-Fi, and 73% are working with firewalls that are blocking inbound connections. So this is what we're seeing folks doing well at. And this I want to show because we just talked about all of those things that we're seeing inside these small and medium-sized organizations, and we're also sort of talked about, the average SensCy score when we first do an assessment is like 504, which seems, man, if my credit score was a 504, it would take me a long time to get it up to an 800, right? But the good news is, when you do work with somebody like us or another cybersecurity company, what you're going to find is, at least with us, what we found with our clients is our average client, when we bring them on, if you look at the left side of this chart, scores a 388. That's the average client score when they first start with us. In the first 3 months of being with us, we've got that improved by 67% to a 647. And after the first year, we've got them improved 107% to an 805. So you're talking about significant improvement in 3 months by working with SensCy, and dramatic improvement by month 12, and really significantly reducing your business risk, which is the most important thing. So even with all of that data that we showed and all of those issues that we see in these organizations, with the right guidance, with the right cybersecurity health plan, with the right strategy, these things can improve very quickly. So oftentimes I think we look at the problem and say, oh man, this is going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of money. But if we do it correctly, we can fundamentally change the posture of our organization. Phishing simulations. I really like this as another thing to celebrate, right? So national data shows that 34% of untrained employees will fall for every phishing email that comes across their email inbox. They'll click on links, they'll download attachments, they'll provide their credentials, right? Across our client base, we've got that reduced to 10%, right? So that's a 71% lower than the untrained benchmark, right? So what does that mean to you for a business, right? Um, Fewer clicks actually means less risk to your business, right? If you can get that down by 71%, you effectively reduced your employee making a mistake and causing a cyber incident by 71%. So really impactful when you're doing this correctly, and when you're combining it with awareness training, doing phishing simulations, doing awareness training, doing phishing simulations over time, right? You'll see a significant reduction in your risk profile. These are real-time learning moments for your employees too. All right. So how do we improve, right? We talked a little bit about where everyone's at a different place probably in their journey. Everyone who's on this webinar, probably if we took your score today, would have a different SensCy score. But ultimately, these four things are what we've seen tried and true that help organizations improve and help them reduce their business risk, which is ultimately what we're after. Number one is to empower your employees, right? We've talked about that. We can do that through training. We can do that through phishing simulation. We can do that through education. We can do that through leadership supporting them when they're, focused on operating more securely. Adopt a risk-based approach, right? So stop looking at cybersecurity as an IT function and start looking at it as a business risk, just like you examine any other risk inside your business. Simplify your incident response, right? We have disaster recovery plans, we have redundancy plans. Let's just focus in on what do we do if we have a cybersecurity incident. And let's run a tabletop exercise against that. Let's test it. Let's make sure we all know what our roles are inside our organization. And this doesn't have to happen often. Once a year is enough. But do something so that when you have an incident, you're prepared to respond to it. And then lastly, partner for expertise. Not everyone has cybersecurity folks within their organization. Most folks have really dedicated IT people, but those IT people need support from folks who really understand cybersecurity. So give that support to your IT staff or your managed service provider um, to help them with some cybersecurity expertise. So those are kind of the four takeaways you should take away if you're looking to improve. Those are the four things that you should be doing. And I would say, lastly, find out where you are. We can improve if we don't know where to start. So if you see that QR code on the screen, if you hover over that, it'll take you to a link where we'll give you a cybersecurity assessment. Everyone who attended this webinar will do it at no cost to you. We'll run you through the SensCy score, get on a call with you, and give you that credit score number so you can kind of see, okay, where am I in my cybersecurity journey? And not only that, more than just a number, we'll meet with you, we'll give you a scorecard, we'll tell you where you're doing really well, and we'll make recommendations on where you can improve. So, with that, I guess we'll jump to questions. I hope this was informative for everyone. And Kim, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, excellent. You might need to take a breath or a sip of water or something.
For
There's a
sure.
lot. Well done. Thank you for sharing all of the data with us. And yes, as Dave mentioned, we'll open it up to questions. Everyone's line is muted, so I just prefer that you use the chat or the Q&A to send questions in. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, I did want to address an earlier question, and that is where can we get the full report? So tomorrow you can expect an email from us here at SensCy. We'll include a link to the recording for today's session, and then we will also include a link for you to go ahead and download the full report. And you're, of course, welcome to do that today if you'd like to go to our website. It is under resources. So there's that. And then I'm waiting for, oh, I think we've got a question. Oh, this is a great question. So Mike's asking, what are three examples of email threats?
Okay. Yeah, really good question. So the first one that we see quite often is what we call a business email compromise. This is where a threat actor poses as, let's say, one of your suppliers, somebody who you pay on a regular basis, you pay an invoice to. They either compromised their email account and it looks like it's coming directly from them, and they say something like, "Hey, our invoice is coming due. We're just letting you know we've switched banking accounts. Here's our new banking information. No rush on the invoice. Just wanted to make sure you had the correct banking information." Seems very innocuous. You go to make the payment a month later, and it goes to a threat actor because it wasn't the real company sending you that email. We see that quite a bit. Um, the best thing to do in that situation is have a policy in place. We talk about cybersecurity policies, right? That requires an approval to change a banking information, and also to teach your employees what to do in that situation, right? Oftentimes the email will look legit. They'll put a phone number at the bottom of it. Don't call the phone number from the bottom of the email. Go to the company information database, find out who this vendor is, call their direct number, right? Because if you call the number that's in the email, you're likely going to be calling the threat actor. So things like that from a business email compromise. We also see spoofing where, you know, um, your organization email gets compromised and it looks like somebody from your organization is sending you an email asking you to do something. That's probably the second highest one we see. And then we also see obviously your general phishing where they might send something that looks like it's coming from Microsoft that says, "Hey, you need to do a password reset, right? Click this button." And it takes them to what looks like a real Microsoft page. But if they were trained and they looked at the actual URL, they would see it's not a real Microsoft page. And what that's really doing is just capturing their credentials. So it says, "Give me your old information," right? You type in your old information. Now they have your password and email address. So those are probably the top three that we see.
Excellent, great. And then question for you, Dave. So, I mean, clearly a theme here throughout the course of the report is there are a lot of baseline cybersecurity practices that businesses just aren't following. I'm curious, your experience working with small and mid-sized businesses for years. What do you think are some of the top reasons why organizations continue to struggle with implementing just the very baseline cyber practices?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, it varies across the board, but generally speaking, um, we when we when the organization puts all of the cybersecurity risk on the IT team, the IT team's looking for tools, right? Like, okay, we had an email problem. I'm going to get an email security tool. We had a problem with one of our, sales reps' mobile devices. I'm going to get an endpoint protection platform, right? And that may help, but the core problem really is leadership's not prioritizing this and looking at this as a business risk, which would allow them to build out a strategy and a plan and not be just kind of randomly buying things and kind of playing whack-a-mole, right? We have a plan in place. Um, we're building that cybersecurity health plan over time. We're making sure that leadership understands. We're making sure the employees are doing what they're supposed to do. We're making sure folks are trained. We have the right policies in place. All of these things drive action through the organization, reduce the risk, and then allow you to focus on, okay, which tools are going to give us the most advantage to the organization? Which ones can we actually manage ourselves, right? Which ones might we have to outsource? So all of that to say, I think having a strategy is probably not, I'm sorry, not having a strategy is why these kind of things that we think is like, hey, these are the basic fundamentals fall through the cracks, right? Because we just didn't have them in play in our plan.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, thank you. So I think that's probably a good place for us to go ahead and wrap up today's session. And as we mentioned, you can expect a follow-up from us here soon. And if you had any questions that we didn't get to today, um, we will go ahead and connect with you separately and provide answers to your questions. So we'll go ahead and wrap. We'd like to thank everybody again for spending part of their day with us, and you all go on and have a terrific afternoon.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.